right. Good evening. And as you can see from the screen, we have a guest with us. And so let me start the recording and we shall proceed with the Liberty Talk.
The Constitution isn't just a document. It's a blueprint for freedom. We're breaking down politics at every level, exposing government overreach, and going where the mainstream media surely won't. Join us in defending individual rights against the bureaucratic tide. You're listening to the Missouri Liberty Report.
All right, folks, and we are back for another rebel-rousing edition of the Missouri Liberty Report. Tonight, this is kind of a last-minute thing. Not exactly last minute, but a few hours before showtime. Representative Wolfin said, hey, you having anybody on tonight? And I said, no, we're not. It's just me and Brandon talking, and I'm sure people get tired of the sound of my voice. They'd rather listen to somebody else talk. So now we have a third voice in the crowd to do everything. So, folks, if you hear me say Representative Bryant Wolfin, you've heard his name spoken many times on this show. He has been a guest on the show at least 3 times, maybe 4. But he has been on a few times, a couple times before he ran, once during his campaign, and then he's now a member of the House of Representatives in Jefferson City here in Missouri. And we enjoy the fact that, he seems to be one of the most principled people there in Jefferson City. And it's one of those things where you're like, well, gee, we need about, 50, 60 more of these people just to be a pain in the necks of the wannabe tyrants that wander around that place and take a lot of lobbyist money. So, it's good. Before I just go off on some long extended rant here, Representative Wolfin, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks, John. Appreciate you having me on. I apologize for the suddenness of just kind of texting you out of the blue, but with the schedule that I've had lately, it's kind of the make or break type of situation. Like, oh, I got a Tuesday night free. Let's just see. Because it seems like everything happens on Tuesdays and Thursdays naturally in the political realm or with my kids' sports and just stuff like that. So the schedule's just been unreal, and I appreciate you guys kind of making special accommodations here. So thank you.
Absolutely not a problem. And now I know Brandon has some questions. He's got some pre-written questions, but before we do that, I don't think that I've had you on to just kind of give us your view on your first full session and then these other 2 special sessions, if you want to add those in. Give us your thoughts on your very first term in office, and just give us some of your takeaways from that, and then we've got all kinds of questions for you after you kind of give us a rundown and your views on everything that occurred this first session for you.
Yeah, let's stick to just the first session, first regular session, and then we could always get into the special sessions later, as I'm sure we will. So, going into the year and similar to what we've discussed and the shows prior to me taking office, I was pretty pessimistic coming in, right? I feel like I was fairly grounded in knowing how the political system worked. I knew the legislative process for sure. Felt like I was coming in fairly advanced, of course, by no means not knowing everything. I'm still learning every single day, and I'm sure there's still seniors that are there still learning every day. But when you come in with your eyes kind of like already halfway open, and you have this pessimistic view on government, specifically at the federal level, but also you see similar things happen at the state level. When you kind of see it firsthand, it really is an eye opener. And we got a taste of it, as I told you guys in the past, with like speed dating and with lobbyists and stuff that just didn't really sit well to kind of like a newbie. or a newbie in the sense of like fundraising and how that side of politics works. Like that was kind of really eye opening. But anyways, coming in, we kind of made some headway pretty much from the get go. I did give the nominating speech for Justin Sparks on the floor for speaker. So, the way that process kind of went down was it's actually kind of funny because I was one of the last ones to kind of jump on board with Justin. Similar to you guys, I'm an independent thinker, and I kind of feel leery about everything. So the reality is we're all politicians, right? So who can you trust and who can you not? And so it took me a little bit to gain a little bit of closure with Justin. And after him being very accommodating, specifically with like rule changes that I was bringing up, as we started having those conversations, he started proposing those and putting videos out about them. And I that kind of helped me out in regards to leaning more in that direction. But it's still a tough decision because the writing's on the wall. There was a high chance that he was not going to win, and so you kind of throw your year, if you will, under the bus by doing that, at least in theory. And so it was kind of one of those tough decisions. That was right out of the gate. Do you stay principled to what you believe is the right thing to do, or do you go the opposite direction and try to remain effective in the general sense of what most people in Jefferson City think effective means, passing legislation, that kind of thing, raising money, being lobbyist friends and stuff, blah, 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 blah. So anyways, obviously I picked what most people would consider to be the wrong path, but what I would consider to be the right path in nominating Justin Sparks. And we set the tone kind of from the very beginning that I was there based on principle, not on anything else. And I had an option of two candidates, one who was willing to delegate power from the speaker's position, and another one who didn't really show me that was going to happen. So I made my choice. And so that kind of set the tone. And then right after that, we go right into rule changes, which is one of the main fights that I planned on picking by coming to Jeff City, was trying to change the rules of the House to really decentralize power. And actually in my nomination speech for Justin, that's essentially what I laid out. If you can go back and listen, and Justin knew exactly what I was speaking on, and he loved it and okayed it. And basically it had nothing to do with him. It had nothing to do with John Patterson. It had everything to do with decentralizing the power in the House of Representatives, because the current structure that we have, we essentially live under a king, and and that would be the Speaker of the House. Whether that's a good person, whether that's a bad person, conservative, liberal, it really doesn't matter, because power, what power does to people, and it's very hard to do things the right way with the incentivized system that we have in Jefferson City, which we can get into later. So that was kind of the second eye-opening experience, was with the rules. So the first eye-opening experience was with like the speed dating and the fundraising and how that is the priority. And then the rules was, I thought people would be more receptive to giving us back more power. Talking about just your everyday representatives. And that just wasn't the case. People weren't really willing to have those conversations. You're just a freshman type, kind of sit down, shut up type of situation. And that was kind of hurtful. So as I kind of seen the writing of the wall and none of that really changing, I decided to just propose a very minor rule change that was just kind of a precursor to the discharge petition. So similar to what Thomas Massey's done at the federal level with the Epstein files and the discharge petition, we have that at the state level too, but we don't have any mechanisms that force a hearing on a bill. So I was just trying to create a system that would force essentially a bill to go to a committee hearing, essentially bypassing the speaker's role in pushing those bills to a specific committee. And super simple. Could have needed some tweaks, whatever, like on the numbers that was needed on representatives. But unfortunately, once again, you just get kind of shouted down. And I was used as an example in private meetings and stuff like that. And it was just really frustrating. So I remember coming out of that caucus meeting, and I text my wife. I pretty much I hate this place. And you're 2 weeks in, and I'm already not even 2 weeks in, and I'm already telling her how much I hate the place. And it was frustrating, right? So you come in. That's when the naivety kind of stopped, and that was the real world situation. Is I'm not going to change anything. So what's the best mechanism of trying to do that is at least being outspoken, and so that's what I did all year. That kind of set the tone. And I mean, there's so much more that I could go on. The third eye-opening experience was the fact that how little regard we have for the Constitution. So I think it's no secret that I'm kind of the strict constitutionalist in the House, as Mike Moon is in the Senate. And I honestly didn't come in really meaning to be that way. I know, when you can go back and listen to your podcast that you had me on, I did very little conversation about the specifics of the Missouri State Constitution, but it was the very first bill that got brought to the House floor, and it had me contemplating. I'm like, this is multi-subjected, and I knew it had the single subject rule, of course, and I went in, cited it, read it, looked at the history again, and it's a simple bill, had 3 provisions in it, all 3 good, would support all 3 of them if they were all single subject bills, all real minor, but still good stuff. But when you lump them into one, there are 3 different provisions and 3 different subjects. And so here I am, the first vote on the House floor, and I'm the only person in the House with my name up on the board that's red. And I was even the bill handler herself even had tried to make this bill single subject by removing the other 2 provisions that were added in committee on the floor, and she was kind of pressured into not doing so, and basically, from my understanding, was told, if you do this, your bill will die. And so we passed what I would believe to be an unconstitutional bill. Of course, it'll never be challenged. It's across the board supported, bipartisan support, so it won't be challenged. And as you guys know, everything is constitutional until it's challenged, and that's kind of the reality of the building. So those are kind of the 3 eye-openers. As we kind of discussed in the very last half hour of your last week's episode, I certainly did not have the best time in Jefferson City. As I've came back in district, I've pretty much told people that, you go to Jeff City to lose your soul, or it sucks the soul out of you. And so I've used the analogy. I don't know if you guys are Harry Potter fans at all, but there's the Dementors in The Prisoner of Azkaban. Well, they're throughout the entire series, but specifically in The Prisoner of Azkaban, where they suck the soul out of the person they're chasing until they no longer have a soul. And that's kind of how I feel like Jefferson City is. And I can go on and on, but that's, you can get the gist of what's going on through that.
Yeah. Now, I have one question, and Brandon, I'm going to let you have it for a little while. My big question is, I mean, you've already stated quite bluntly that you hate the place, and you're like, I hate that place. What other emotion? Okay. So what other emotions go through you when you just hear these people you have somebody's like, yeah, I'd rather it be a single subject bill, but and then that this person's told, well, if you do that, the bill doesn't go anywhere. What's that do to you? What is it? Is it just flat out frustrating, and you just after a while you just throw your hands up in the air and go, I mean, we all appreciate your candor on the floor when you get up and you speak about how unconstitutional things are. We love it. You does it, like, after a while, do you just feel like everything I'm saying is falling on deaf ears? Or, you know, and you go, I'm going to stick to my guns, but in the back of your mind, you're like, this is doing no good. I mean, how do you come out feeling after some of these things happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's very frustrating and it's saddening at times. You know, and of course, I stated that I hate the place, right? But, you know, I don't, that's just in that one instance. I mean, it's a very frustrating place, but it's also at the the same time, I see those popping up there. So, but it's also at the same time, it's very incredibly honoring. Like it's an honor to be there, right? So, especially when you know you're the only person saying the things that you do, and that's what keeps me going. So, like, yes, I have a far less better time than what most of my colleagues do there. And it's funny because even the Democrats will acknowledge that Bryant's in they're not actually the smallest minority in the House. It's actually Bryant is the smallest minority. So that's kind of the ongoing joke. But the reality is if I wasn't there saying it, who would? And so that's why I'm there, and that's why I will hopefully continue to be there. I hope my constituents can see the value in having someone who's independent-minded and see the value in having someone who's preaching these constitutional principles. Because if we really want to be the conservative government that we say we are, what are we conserving? I personally think that we should be conserving the Constitution. I feel like that's what the founders believed in. We're conserving founding beliefs. We're conserving Christian beliefs. And that's what we're trying to do, or at least that's what we campaign to do. Whether or not we're actually trying, that's the question.
Yeah, go ahead, Brandon. Go ahead with some of your questions, and we'll dive right in.
Yeah, just wanted to say thanks for being on again. First, one thing that's big with me is, as I'm sure it is with John, is cutting spending. Didn't see very much of it happening in this last session. Want to know what the feelings are around the building about cutting spending. If there's any hope for it in this next session, like what's the word at Jeff City about cutting spending, particularly from Republicans and the more conservative side?
Ooh, you better watch what you say around here. You might get tomatoes thrown at you or something. Cutting spending. What is that? It's funny. That was one of the things that I knew coming in that wasn't going to happen. I knew early on that essentially I was probably going to vote against all budget bills, and I did. Michael Davis and I both went in and we had this discussion about where the budget needed to be in order for us to vote for it. And granted, some can argue that this would be still too high, but we both said it needed to be for sure under 40 billion. Like that, if you take a look at where we were at prior to COVID and you take inflationary rates and add that to it, it would be somewhere around 35 to 40 billion. If we could have gotten around there, I certainly would have been more than happy to start supporting bills. And unfortunately, we weren't even close. Quite frankly, I believe this is the second largest budget in the history of Missouri. And granted, it would probably be the third largest if last year we had a bunch of people running for, last year we had a bunch of people running for statewide office, right? So they had to all look like these fiscal conservatives. So what they did was they passed a slightly slashed budget. And then with the intention of us passing an additional appropriations bill this year, which is exactly what we did. That's what House Bill 4 is. It's essentially a continuing resolution, a CR that they do at the federal level. Only we call it I'm drawing a blank on it. I'll probably come to me later, but it's essentially similar to a CR. So I was very disappointed that we weren't even willing to have the conversations. And we have some great conservative people on the budget. Like don't let it fool you. Like we do, and they're fighting for the cuts. It's just, I don't know. You just don't see it. Like I'm going to give a shout out to John Simmons. He's not on the budget, but there's something that really has hit home with me all year since we've had this discussion. But we were talking about when we were passing appropriations bills, and John Simmons called us out, and someone said something about a conservative budget, and John's like, "This ain't a how is this conservative?" He's like, "This ain't a conservative budget." And he's right. And I agree with that. I tried to get on budget. Granted, it's not like they would have listened probably, but I would have loved to have been able to get on there. And I remember when I had the interview with the speaker's staff about committees assignments, I specifically asked them, you guys actually want to cut the budget and you want someone who will work day and night with a fine-tooth comb to find fat? Like, I'm your guy. I've done it at the city level. I've done it with my business. Like, I'm telling you, I can find those cuts. But if you're not going to actually cut the budget, then it's probably best you just utilize me somewhere else. And so now I know why I wasn't on the budget committee. Granted, in hindsight, I'm probably thankful because the amount of hours and time that they put on that committee. Look, once again, I'm going to give a little bit of credit where it's due. The cuts weren't made like we would have liked to see, but those guys worked. Like the budget committee, they put in a lot of hours. So to their credit, but on the other side of not giving them credit, there were no cuts made.
So are these the people that you're talking about on the budget committee? Do they have like are they the ones who are writing the appropriations bills? Like basically, are they the ones directing the money that goes out as well?
Not really. They're the ones who have the most say in the process. So the budget director. The chair of the budget committee, Dirk Deaton, or Representative Deaton, and his staff are the main ones. So essentially there's a budget staff, and they're the ones who basically take care of the budget. Granted, it also comes from the governor. Like it starts at the governor's office, right? He divvies it to the House, and the House team does their thing under the direction of Representative Deaton, who once again, he put his ton of time into it. So I'm not in this position. I don't really know what that looks like. I know the goal is to try to pass something that looks conservative or seems conservative, maybe cuts a little bit, but yet the Senate is also going to get on board, because you have to realize, anything that they're trying to pass, the Senate has to be on board. It's our one constitutional obligation is to pass a budget, essentially. So, to defend them a little bit, they have to work around that. I'm not in that position, so it's easy for me to be like, well, I'd cut this, I'd cut this, I'd cut this, I'd cut this, but they don't have all the other eyes and ears that are governor's office over them, or at any given time, if they're trying to do too much, think of it, they could be pulled from that position right away. So that's the other side of it, is if you want to keep the arguably the second most powerful, if not the third most powerful position in the House, well, you have to comply. Yeah, exactly, Tom. A lot of hours.
Now, again, this is not me being accusational towards anybody. This is just me kind of begging the question of the people in those positions, the people on those committees. Like, if they were taking lobbyist money from any sort of entity, would they have any control over where the money gets spent? Or is that am I misinterpreting something there? Or just under the hypothetical, if someone were taking legalized bribes, like campaign donations from certain PACs or certain entities, do they have the power of the purse to where that funding goes? Or is this? Yeah. Okay. Again, there's that power. And yeah, I don't want to sit here and accuse anybody as well. To be real honest, with not being on the budget committee, it's very difficult to deep dive into these budgets. So essentially, the way the budget committee gets all the specifics, we get we get the same stuff that you guys could see online. If you go and look at House Bill 1 through 20, House Bills 1 through 20, and what you see online is all that we get. Now, technically, we probably could get the details if we looked into it, but essentially everybody off of the budget committee is relying on the budget committee to do all that work and look at those specifics. So then at that point, you make your decision, yes or no, based off of just the kind of like crumbs that were given in these House bills themselves. So, because basically what it'll say is it has general appropriations, $500 million for this. Well, what does that $500 million consist of? Maybe 10 different departments that are divvying out that money. So it's hard for me to specifically say exactly that I've seen that. So once again, I'm also not accusing anybody from doing it, but do they have that power? Yeah, sure. Wow. And then I guess just is there anything in specifics that you've seen from the budget that you think just on its face is wow, that's too much money to be spending on that? Are there things in the budget that you've seen where you go, we could cut some of that? I don't know why we're spending so much money on these particular things. Is there anything standing out to you on that budget?
Just being honest, look, everything, but it would be the easy answer. But any actual specifics, no. When you come into the mindset of that everything should be cut because we're spending way too much, we're spending above our means, then it's kind of hard to kind of deep dive. A lot of that is like capital projects. So like, and it's kind of funny because House Bill 19, which is kind of like the capital project, the pet project bill, it actually didn't pass in regular session this year. So there was a lot of pet projects that were unable to be paid for. And what I mean by pet projects is different Republicans, or not even, it's actually across the board. There's Republicans and Democrats actually trying to get projects for their district. Pet projects is just kind of the nickname that it has. So I don't mean to be defamatory towards anything on that, because that's one of the things that we're there to do, is try to bring money back to our districts. But most of that is stuff that government probably should not be spending money on, and like parks, community buildings, recreational stuff. So like there's, to give an example, that would be one thing, but there's literally not a single appropriation or department I wouldn't cut. So I always thought, like, this is one thing that I love about Rand Paul's plan, like the penny plan, right? For every dollar spent, we just cut one penny across the board from every department, and we figure it out from there. And I think we could do something very easily at the state level, and most places wouldn't bat an eye. Most departments, that is, it really wouldn't be. It's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, we covered on our show what appeared to be a Justin Sparks pet project one time, but I'll digress on that for now. We have so whenever you're given these like constitutional based speeches, whenever you're like talking about Article 3, Section 21 and 23 on the state house floor, we did play a video on this show of a rebuttal, that because you asked someone on the house floor, like, why, like, can you give me your justification as to why this is okay, like why you can put multiple subjects in a bill, and why when you read the title it's so vague, and we've changed the title without rereading it. And you basically called them out on their unconstitutional practices, and he kind of gave you a non-answer. It was just kind of like, we did it, so that's why it's okay, is kind of what it seemed like. Are you getting any actual justification from any of these lawmakers, like off the record, or do any of them like try to, like, whenever you tell them you won't vote for their unconstitutional bill because it's unconstitutional, do they try to give you some sort of like legal justification, or do they just kind of acknowledge that they're
hey Brandon, can I cut in real quick? I'm sorry, I lost audio. Just bear with me one moment here. I don't know what's going on here. All right, I think I'm back in. My apologies. I can, yes. Okay. So I heard pretty much up till I heard most of that. Could you just repeat the second half of that?
The main thing is that, like, what are the justifications that the people have, that these other members have, for passing and putting forward unconstitutional legislation? Because I know I've heard somebody give you a non-answer that basically, like, we do it, that's why it's okay. But have you heard anything like solid, or what's the justification that they have for breaking the oath that they took to the Constitution?
Yeah, this is the battle all year long, right? It's the Supreme Court. That's their justification. They've allowed it in the past, so that's why it's okay. And I think, to me, that's just not a great answer. Like the Supreme Court, in my opinion, does not really have the enumerated powers that should justify whether or not something, or them being the sole voice on whether or not something should be constitutional or not. They're just another branch of the government that is supposed to be protecting one's rights and allowing so. It is our duty to be just as constitutional, if not more constitutional, than the Supreme Court. Well, you can't be more constitutional. All three branches of the government should be constitutional, but it is our duty to be that constitutional voice for our constituents. And we just don't see that. But yeah, I mean, that's always the argument, is, well, the Supreme Court allows it, or the Supreme Court says that it's fine, and that's the precedent, so we're good with it. And that's unfortunate, because as much as I would love to rely on the Supreme Court, as a pro-life conservative, the federal Supreme Court also okayed basically Roe v. Wade for 50 years, and then all of a sudden it overturned it. Or you have the Chevron case, stuff gets overturned. So, it's to me, the Supreme Court is made up of 9 human beings as well that also all have their own interpretations. So I'm not too sure that we should be putting all of our eggs in that one basket when it comes to stating our own interpretations. That is, so when I say that I took the oath to defend and uphold the Constitution, it's to me, it's per my interpretation and no one else's. And yes, that maybe that's stricter than everyone else's, but I think it's plainly obvious if you look at Article 3, Section 3. It has to be, the single subject has to be clearly expressed in the title. We are not supposed to be changing titles. Once you do that, you change the purpose of the bill. Article 3, Section 21. So, if you go and look at the history of the reason why a lot of those are put in, it comes very clear that we're trying to prevent log rolling. And then when you have bills like Senate Bill 3 in the first special session that clearly was log rolled specifically with the property tax freeze, which by the way itself was unconstitutional by passing special laws, which is Article 3, Section 4030. It's just unbelievable to me that we just kind of turn a blind eye. And it's up to the people. They're the other hand in this. The people themselves have to be educated and wake up on what their government is doing, because ultimately they're the ones. They're supposed to be the check on power. And because if you expect a government to hone in on itself, whether it's in a different branch or whether it's in a different department, well, good luck. We're well beyond that at this point. We're just all one kumbaya. I don't even know what the analogy would be here at the government, but you can't expect a government to basically hone in on itself.
No, the government, I believe what you're looking for is they would hold hands and sing kumbaya while the economic ship continued to sink there. Yeah.
There we go. Yes, sir. Thank you. It's just, yeah, look, bottom line, that's kind of it. And I get it, because most people think that. Most people think the Supreme Court is the end all be all. And most people, I'm sure you guys may know this. I know Tom March knows this. And I've had several discussions with Representative Chappell on this too. But, the federal Supreme Court gave themselves power of judicial review in Marbury versus Madison in 1803's decision. So it's we're relying on a branch of government that gave themselves that specific power. Think about that.
Oh, yeah. When you come from Tom Martz's School of Constitutional Arts, you know all about 9 men in black robes. He preaches that often. So definitely.
Yeah. And that's important. It's crazy to me, because I don't think I was ever taught that in school. And I could be wrong. We forget. But the fact that I had to go to YouTube to figure that out, that's what's the state of our educational system?
Well, it's not even that necessarily that they don't, because I remember covering things like the state constitution and the U.S. Constitution, but it was never driven home the importance that it is the rule of law. This is what we derive our society and our laws off of. And people, I think young people in the country just don't understand. They don't feel the gravity of that. Until you've had the government overstep on you, or until you start to realize how overtaxed you are and how easily it is for the government to take your rights away, until you feel the impact, you don't understand the importance. And it's not really pressed upon in the schools that understanding the Constitution and as Tom Martz would say, not just being able to read the Constitution, but understanding the wording, understanding what the founders meant when they wrote it is also equally important.
That is absolutely, you hit the nail on the head. Look, what do you think is the reason behind, so this is Article 3, Section 23, so single subject rule. Limitation of scope of bill. So no bill shall contain more than one subject, which shall be clearly expressed in its title. Why do you think they throw that in there? There has to be historical context behind that. That was thrown in the 1875 Constitution. So we've been under this precedent for literally over essentially 150 years at this point. And you can kind of see also like the historical context of how we've evolved on the House floor. And I think I'm going to do this more next year. I got on in one of my speeches, and I read off titles from the early 1900s, which are clearly specific. I read it to a family member of mine who's very politically involved, and he thought I was reading the actual legislation. I'm like, no, that's the title of the bill. That's not even the like this was back in 1903 or something like that. And he had thought that I was reading him the actual legislation. I was only reading the title. I'm like, well, I was like, if we put this bill in today's context, it would say changing provisions relating to mining. And that's it. One word subject. That's it. One vague word. And to me, that's you could, like you said, looking up the history, because that was something coming in like I didn't do. I didn't know that before coming in, but I knew to solidify like my position and to further educate not only my colleagues but Missourians in general. You need to know that history. You can't just be like, oh, well, it says this, and that's why I do this. Like, no, like here's the reasons why this was put in the first place, and this is why I believe this is what our founders, or not even our founders, but our forefathers wanted us to do.
Yeah, I remember another one of your speeches on the House floor. You talked about how they'd added like 70 pages to a bill with amendments. And then it totally changed the subject of the bill. It went from like 20 pages to 90 pages. And you're like, this is the Nancy Pelosi, we have to pass it to know what's in it kind of thing. And so, yeah, you're definitely right.
I was kind of proud of that one.
Yeah, that was a nice one. That was a good one.
Yeah. So, that was funny. And I don't want to sell that bill short. It was 82 pages of amendments, not 70.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
How many was it? What did you say? 92?
It was 82 pages of amendments.
Yeah,
that's insane. And this is what was hilarious about that bill is, all like when that bill or that amendment was first introduced, like everybody was up in arms. We're like all looking around. You can't see it on the cameras, but like we're all like trying to figure out what the heck is in this thing, because on the floor, there's just no time to research it. There's just not. 15 minutes is, you can't read a bill that is that long. And so and that happened 2 or 3 different times this year. What I find funny is one of them, a freshman Democrat who is an attorney and he's probably quoted the Constitution second after me, second most after me. And he got up, he's like, this bill's unconstitutional. There's criminal law or criminal statutes in here with civil statutes, and essentially that would make that unconstitutional, and they had to amend the bill on the House floor because they tried to do that. And that's the stuff that you see and you're like, we shouldn't be doing this. This is exactly why Article 3, Section 23 was put in place. That is exactly why Article 3, Section 21, not changing the scope of the bill, or not the scope, but the man, my brain is not working. The purpose, thank you. My brain is not working tonight. So, but yeah, I mean, that's exactly why those are in there. But yet, they amended it, and then all of a sudden, the upperclassmen get up, and they're like, well, we do this every year, and, we heard some of these in Judicial Committee, and, trust us, it's all good. It's fine. And it changed. So, yeah. And I believe that amendment passed. Now, the bill didn't go through the Senate, but I believe that bill and amendment passed the House, if I remember correctly.
Well, we'll be able to see it on Legiscore pretty soon. He's got all the bills ranked. I think he's still tallying the totals on everything.
Can't wait.
Oh, yeah.
I hope somehow I'm not first, but the day
where you're not first. Now, your colleague that you mentioned earlier, Michael Davis, I heard that he also had a pretty good record this year. He would probably be your only competitor. So for the granite plaque, I believe, is what Tom gives out.
Well, Michael Davis is always a top competitor in that. And to Michael's, that is one smart kid. I mean, I say he's a kid. He's been there way longer than me, but of course I'm about 5 or 6 years older than he is. And he just whips out stuff out of nowhere. Like he's one of those that, the kid in class that never looks like they're really trying hard. They're not really doing the research. And then they show up and they ace the test. Like that's like Michael Davis. Like he just shows up and he knows all this stuff. I'm like, dude, we could have used you 30 minutes ago when we were discussing this bill. Like,
yeah, we'll have to have him on. We'll have to reach out to him, see if we can get him on the show sometime. Seems like he'd have a good conversation with us.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about, maybe I'm misremembering, but did you not join a lawsuit that was challenging legislation at the Supreme Court or at the courts in some level? Could you delve in on that a little?
Yeah. Appreciate you bringing that up. So I'll start off with this, like actions speak louder than words, right? So a part of the job is, we could sit here and preach the Constitution all day long, but if we're not going to do something about it, and of course we could try to use our words on the floor, but that's not the only avenue we have. And so, of course, I'm not going to take credit. I was approached by citizen activist Ron Calzone with the Article 3 Institute and Senator Mike Moon, and asked, they were looking for somebody on the House floor to also be a plaintiff in this position. And of course, naturally, like I gave the big speech against it. And I did try to get a constitutional argument into the Journal. I had, 14 signatures on it, but I was just a little bit too late on there. And so it didn't go into the Journal, but I do have all that on record, and we're putting that into the suit. So yeah, Senate Bill 3, which is during the first special session that we had, that was the terrible tax subsidy for the stadiums bill, along with the unconstitutional property tax freezes that the reason it's unconstitutional is because it's a special law. It's not a general law that is applied across every county. It was clearly log rolled to create more support for senators that were not supporting the bill before, and other stuff in there too. So that's tax credits or something along those lines. Man, I should have had that in front of me. I should have been prepared. I'm sorry, but yes. So long story short, they came to me. They said, "Look, we're taking this bill to court. Clearly, this thing is unconstitutional." And we would love for you to be involved as a plaintiff / spokesperson type of situation. And of course, as I said, actions speak louder than words. I was on board immediately and look forward to the outcome. Our attorneys are still working, literally getting emails daily. The new AG, just a quick update, the new AG, Catherine Hanaway, excuse me, sorry. She and her team requested for a different judge, so that kind of pushed our first hearing back, and so now that's what we're waiting on.
Okay, very cool, very exciting stuff. So are you fighting it on the fact that it's like the corporate welfare for the stadiums is unconstitutional, that the basically using the tax freeze incentive to buy votes on the bill as unconstitutional, or just both together on the same bill being in a special session, not general? Is like, are you attacking it from all angles here, or is there a specific legal argument that you're working on? Like what's the specific angle that you guys are working on for this lawsuit?
Yeah, it's all of them. So I'm going to pull up my constitutional objection real quick here. So, or not, because apparently I don't have it. Okay. So yeah, it's on all of them, right? Well,
right.
The whole point of anybody challenging a bill that's unconstitutional is to set precedent of some form or fashion. And, all the above for what you said. Obviously, Article Section 3, Article 38 or 39A or something like that. Once again, I don't have it in front of me. My apologies. But basically the thing that says that we can't use public money for private subsidies and funding. Clearly, that's what this is. You have the special tax freezes. It's a special law. It's clearly also multi-subjected. It's Article 3, Section 23. It violates that. The original bill was specifically for the tax subsidies, and we didn't really change the title. The title was always about taxation. It was always pretty vague, but we did change the purpose of the bill by adding in property tax freezes and other tax credits and stuff like that in there. So, yeah, I mean, the whole goal is what this bill has 4 or 5 different unconstitutional provisions in it, and we need the precedent. So, and the support of the Supreme Court, or not the support, but we're hoping to get that ruling up to side with us from the Supreme Court, or the courts in general, but I'm sure this will go to the state Supreme Court. And long story short, it will set a precedent that will hopefully prevent us from doing things like this in the future. And overall, that's the goal. Once again, put your money where your mouth is. And of course, I have, when it comes to money, little skin in the game. Another shout out to Ron Calzone. He's kind of the one spearheading the financial side of this, and his attorneys as well. And I'm just kind of here to be the spokesperson and be along for the ride.
Right on. So do you think that the state wanted a change in venue because they didn't care for the judge, or do you think, or you said they asked for a new judge? Now, is there, why would the state, do you think that the judge in the case would have been more favorable towards listening to the constitutional arguments, or what do you think their motive was on that?
You know, I actually don't know the answer to that. So I will say when the first judge was selected, we had a conversation amongst us, and the attorneys and Mr. Calzone were pretty pleased with the selection. Not like overjoyed, but you know, they were like, good. You know, that's a good judge, principled, and you know, we look forward to the hearings. But I don't know what the purpose is behind that. It was a little bit odd that as soon as the AG position swapped to Hanaway, then all of a sudden that was the first thing they did. It's in their right to do so. That's a part of the judicial process. So, you know, there's no complaints. That's every bit of their right. But yeah, it's definitely a little bit odd.
Well, that's awesome. Hopefully you guys get a big win for the Constitution there. We're rooting for you, of course.
Thank you very much.
So recently, I heard Ron DeSantis come out saying he was going to he was pushing to get rid of property taxes for the state of Florida. We heard, now I'm drawing a blank. He ran for governor. He was, you've heard some push in Missouri for ending the income tax. Eigel. Yeah. You've heard some pushes for ending the income tax in Missouri. Is there any murmurings on the House or in Jefferson City about any seriousness to any actual major tax cuts? I know that usually has to go along with some spending cuts, but they usually will preach the tax cuts first and then worry about the budget second, as they always do. So any word on the floor or anything in Jefferson City about cutting taxes, or where they stand? Maybe the Republicans stand on cutting taxes?
Yeah, that is a great question. So is it talked about all the time? You know, there's certainly a want for spending or tax cuts. I will say that. What is the best way to do that is usually where we falter in having those conversations. Not that we have a ton of those conversations, but like, you know, for me, for instance, I live in a county that has very little retail. We very heavily rely on property taxes to obviously support our schools just like any school, but then also our county does have property taxes as well, and our municipalities as well, to kind of help funding in those instances. So like the more rural areas are typically the counties that will step up and fight against these property tax cuts. And well, Missouri is mostly rural. So that's kind of like where that battle goes on with the property tax side of things. I will sit here and I will definitely admit that property taxes to me are the most egregious tax. If the government can come in and take your property at any time for you not paying them rent, do you actually own your property? Like, that's always been my argument, right? So that's very frustrating to me. But I think as of like just kind of seeing the political climate of Jefferson City and knowing what some of these rural counties are put into the position they're put into right now, specifically with other former policies that have destroyed their revenues, such as the online sales tax. When the online sales tax was passed, there was sales tax exemptions put in for certain corporations, specifically in the energy sector, that absolutely destroyed some of the revenue for some of these counties, specifically in rural areas that don't have a lot of retail, and they were not able to pass an online sales tax because guess what? Their people don't like taxes. So it put a lot of these counties in position. So I say that in a roundabout way of saying, to me, I think it would be smarter to go after the income tax because that won't affect right now. That is because that's not going to affect schools. It's not going to school funding. It's not going to affect county funding. And, not that I'm super sympathetic specifically towards school funding, but the reality is they hold a lot of weight in Jefferson City. So, and, not to mention the quickest way to hit every Missourian's pocketbook really is the income tax. So I think that's the way that we could affect most Missourians is by going after the income tax first, and it only affects state funding. So that would be my preference right now. I do plan on filing an income tax abolishment bill next year. It'll be kind of a phase out type of deal, which will equate to spending cuts at the state level. And that's kind of going to be my priority. But, the property tax situation with assessment increases, that's the hot button topic right now. That's where fundraising, I wouldn't say a lot of fundraising, but that's what's getting all the headlines. So I really don't know what's coming up next year. I have my preferences, but either way, like I'm in favor of cutting taxes and letting Missourians keep their money and making sure that the government can't take your property. So,
well, I want to ask you your opinion on something, Bryant. Do you think, and this is just a hypothetical type of thing, do you ever think that we could get to a point where we substitute things like property tax, income tax, whatever, with a use tax? So when you go to the store, you buy anything, you pay a tax. And it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're very poor or very wealthy. You're all going to pay whatever it is, 10%, whatever it is. I know at the federal level that people have ran the numbers, and they've stated several times that if they would just implement a use tax at the federal level, you could abolish the IRS and you could get rid of the income tax, and they would actually generate more revenue for the federal government with a use tax. That's not something that I just pulled out of my hind end. That's factual. But at the state level, do you know of anybody who's tried to run those numbers and say, all right, if everyone just every time they go to the store, they buy a car or whatever, there's a use tax, right? And we get rid of some of these other taxes. It seems like to me, the state would probably generate even more revenue, but also the people would have an option to maybe pay less taxes. Like they'll say, well, we're just going to spend less money, or we just won't buy groceries this week because we're good, or we'll do this, or we won't do this. And they have a little more input on how much taxes they pay. But then again, I think the state would likely generate more revenue if and only if we don't let special interests like agriculture or big energy companies or whatever write themselves a loophole into those taxes, which is a big ask in this state. Between ag and energy producers, the big thing is getting those people to not, or making it to where those people don't get to write themselves out of everything. They just get permission to do everything, or they get loads of tax credits. But in your opinion, do you ever think maybe a use tax would be the way to go?
Yeah, so I've heard that at the federal level as well. Implementation of how that would work here in Missouri, not 100% sure, to be honest, and it's certainly something that I would probably need to do a little bit more research on. But anything that isn't a direct tax on someone's wallet or property is better than what we have now. And so one of the big fights, like with property taxes, is going to be county funding. And it's funny because it's easy at the state level to come in and be like, oh, we're just going to cut this. And the ones who are mainly going to be affected are schools, but then the other ones that are going to be affected are the counties. And so, like I said earlier, I am sympathetic to an instance, like, because our county specifically, where I live in, is just absolutely dying because of those exemptions that special interests were able to write themselves in earlier on with that online sales tax. So anyways, anything is better than what we got right now. And I think if that is a way that we could certainly help fund or help pick up some revenue, specifically in rural counties, that would help. The one concern I would just have, just off the top of my head, in counties that don't have retail, a whole lot of retail, I don't know how much that would help offset some of their funding. So that's just the one thing that you would have to look at in logistics of trying to pass something like that here in Missouri, because that's a real argument. Like I said, most counties here in Missouri are rural, so that's where the main fight happens. So you could like look back in the history of like rural or property tax votes or votes on education changes and stuff like that. And it's always the rural counties that are the ones that always kind of come out against those things. And that's because a lot of those counties are really struggling. So anyways, I would agree. I think I would love to look further. Actually, I will look further into what a use tax could do here in Missouri. I have not heard anybody discuss it. I don't think there was any legislation filed this year, at least not from what I've seen. But I think it's worth having the conversation, and I'll look a little bit more into it. But I know next year, when it comes to taxation, the two bills that I will be filing, of course, they will go nowhere, but it will be some sort of income tax abolishment. And I will be looking to also abolish the state tax commission.
Yeah. It's one of those things, Bryant, where it's hard. And I understand your point about, like Gasconade County, we don't have a lot of industry, right? So the school, of course, is going to be dependent on the personal property tax. Now, of course, every time they turn around, when their school bonds are getting ready to run out, they want to turn around and pass a new one so that increase and property tax stays on there and it doesn't fall off. It's just as, and I don't know. I don't know how many people I've told at work about this whole thing with a non-governmental organization having county assessors sign something saying that they agree to raise the what do they call it? The property valuations by
the assessments.
The assessments by 14.99%. And then the ones that refuse, the STC is saying, well, we'll just come in, we'll remove you from office, we'll freeze your budget, we won't give you tax revenue. And I'm thinking, okay, as a representative of the people, no matter what district you're in, how can you look at this and say, seems fair to me that an unelected body is basically bullying assessors into signing an agreement that is, of course, this non-governmental body doing this is unconstitutional, and I would think illegal as the day is long, because what business do they have working with a governmental body and then counties assessors from across 100 plus counties in this state? Just as a human being, just as a person living here in Missouri, seeing all this news, I think we're at 5 assessors now who said we're not playing along. I think I've heard of 5. It's just infuriating that the body, not all of it, but the majority of the body doesn't seem to have any interest in figuring something else out. It's like, okay, 29 states don't have a personal property tax, yet they still have schools and they have, fire departments and bridges and roads and police. They have all these things, but it seems like no one wants to ask the question, or not many want to ask the question, well, how are they doing it? How are they generating this revenue? No matter how populous they are or whatever, how are they generating necessary revenue to fund these things? It seems like it's almost like that's too much work. Like you're telling me you can't call a representative in another state and say, how are you guys funding this? And then see what you can do in your state to try to maybe mimic that. I can't. It boggles my mind. Again, I understand the funding thing in rural areas, but it boggles my mind that so many people and in government seem to say, well, it sucks that you get this bill December 1st every year, but that's just the way it is. And we just can't seem to figure out another way maybe to do this whole thing. And now we're getting to the point where it's a very real threat that more and more people, if this behavior continues, that more and more people will be taxed out of their homes. And as a lawmaker, as a legislator, I would think that would be something you would want to fight really hard about, especially if you're the one voting to never look at getting rid of personal property tax ever. And then these valuations come along. I mean, look at Jackson County. My God, they had 150, 200% increases. And then your legislator doesn't seem to even bat an eye. I mean, that's not a real good way to me. If I'm voting for someone in that county, I would be like, well, or in that district, I don't want that guy because he doesn't care that I'm being taxed out of my home by idiot. I can't say the word I want to say. But it just, to me, it drives me up the wall to see kind of that mentality from so many. Like this is, and from Gary Ridenour and some of these guys who have gone and testified on Eigel's bill. And he said one of the most infuriating things was to see firefighters, police in their dress blues from St. Louis County or the big counties showing up and saying, you can't do this. You can't take our funding away. We won't be able to get fire trucks, even though fire trucks don't come from personal property tax. They come from somewhere else. But they show up in their dress blues, maybe on taxpayer dime, which also sucks. And they're like, you can't take this away from us. You can't take our funding. And it's just instant caving. But the motivation to try to figure out a better path forward, for the most part, I don't want to paint with a broad brush and paint everybody in this light, but it seems like the majority of them have no motivation, to try to figure this out and say, we don't want to tax people out of their property. These people have worked to build their credit and have a mortgage or buy a car or a UTV or a boat. And we'd sure hate to see them lose it on the county courthouse steps because we're extorting money out of them every year. It just doesn't seem like the moral thing to do here.
Yeah, I mean, you said it very well, and that's what I was quickly looking up while you were talking is how much actual property tax revenue in Missouri for 2024 that came up, and it, assuming this number is right, of course, so take this with a grain of salt. I'm not 100% sure, but it looks as if statewide property tax revenue in Missouri was $10.4 billion. That's kind of insane when you think about it, because one of my thought processes is like, all right, well, how can you, as a state government, if we want to try to look towards a reform of getting rid of property taxes, then, is the state going to have to come in and subsidize that? Because I think that could be like Bill Eigel actually touched on that when he was running for governor. Is like, look, we're going to cut property taxes, and then people was like, well, what are you going to do with the funding for it? And he's like, well, we're going to cut the state government and help subsidize those counties. And I think that could be an argument. I don't know if that's a long-term solution, but it's certainly a short-term solution. But when you look at the $10.4 billion in 2024 of property tax revenue, that's a lot of cash to try to cover. So that's a tall order. But yeah, I mean, as you said, it doesn't really seem to be a priority. And I know we had, you've seen this kind of special tax, property tax committee that kind of went around the state and hearing stuff, but it didn't really amount to anything. So I don't know if that's going to mean we're going to tackle anything next year or what the plan is going to be. But we need to wake up and have the serious conversation with our commissioners, and we need to have a serious conversation with Missourians and realize, like, what's more important, the government getting its money or people getting taxed out of their houses? And, I know where I would side, but, there has to be a solution in there somewhere. But the biggest problem is, like, as I said, I know we've had this committee, but I watched a couple of the committees or the committee hearings, that went around the state, and I didn't really get anything out of it. So I don't see the actual conversations taking place for actual solutions. And actually, speaking of which, I kind of want to hit on something to that point that was kind of like the fourth wake-up call that I was talking about earlier, where I had like three big ones. The fourth one is the fact that there's like no communication whatsoever. So I said this with the second special session with specifically the IP reform bill that we passed, is the fact that, we don't talk about these things. We're asked that if we want to, we're asked to debate bills in our conference or our caucus meetings an hour before session starts. And that's just not realistic. You can't, first of all, you can't debate these bills as a caucus when everyone's opinionated and one person starts to talk and all of a sudden 10 people want to talk. It's just not possible to do an hour before we're going out on the floor to vote on a bill. It's just not possible. So I don't understand, when we have something that is such a high priority for the caucus, such as IP reform or property taxes or income tax, why we're not all engaged in having at least ask those who may be interested in being engaged in those conversations and try to come up with a real solution. Instead, what we get is either something that comes from the governor's office, something that comes from the leadership in the Senate, or something that comes from leadership in the House, and it's just put on our laps and take it or leave it type of situation. And I'm not too sure that's going to end in the best results for Missourians. So it's definitely a frustrating situation we're in right now.
Yeah. When we talk about property taxes too, the schools get brought up a lot, but another thing that's been frustrating to me, and I'm not saying all Republicans, but there have been a lot of Republicans and a lot of Democrats who want to fight over how DESE is ran, how education's run. But it just seems like instead of any shrinkage at all, it's one side or both sides want to add new rules about how education is done. How are we educating kids? The curriculum, all these things. They want to back and forth. And it's like they're just adding more check boxes for the schools, which means you have to have people in these newly created departments that spread the funding out to do these certain things. After interviewing, I believe it was the president of the Camden County School Board. And I asked her, I said, these schools, they have a superintendent. They have an assistant superintendent. They have all the staff. Why? Her answer, very direct, was, hey, it's because we have to check all these boxes first before we even start educating the kids. That's why the staffing has to be that large, because we have to have these people in order just to check the boxes. And again, I don't hear, and I don't mean to say this is all the people in Jeff City are dumb, but everybody, it seems like the majority want to battle back and forth over who rules over education. But the real issues with DESE and the Missouri Department of Education don't seem to be addressed very much. It's just this fight over who gets control, who gets to make the rules. And then, you have Mike Parson being congratulated by DESE for adding $850,000 to the budget for certain things. And I thought this guy was champion conservative guy, small government guy. And here we have another a state agency, pretty much kissing his butt for adding $850,000 over a very short period of time. And I thought, well, that's not very limited government. That's not reining in spending. And everybody's just breaking their own necks to pat themselves on the back. But there's so many things. And, that's a problem. Brandon and I have discussed this a lot. There are so many fronts to fight on when it comes to bloated government. And you take one step forward, but you have 11 other fronts closing in. And there's not enough grassroots organizations with highly motivated people in large numbers to spread out and fight. It's like they have to pick one thing because they feel very passionate about it. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying, like, IP reform has been a big thing for the past few years. And then they do what they did. It's like, okay, you guys have had so many opportunities. Then all the infighting kicks in. You get to the last day of session, it dies, and then it's the top priority for the next session, and then the next session, and they did what they did in the special session here. I don't know, dude. I want to be. Sometimes I really want to be optimistic, but then I see how both sides, for the main part, act, and I thought, now, how am I supposed to have trust in these people? Because they love to tell me how constitutional they are or how much of a conservative they are. But then I see the way they vote on bills, and I'm like, this isn't what you've been telling us that you want to do. And not enough of them seem actually motivated to, whether it's property taxes, IP reform, tax credits, DESE, to really stand behind something and say, okay, we have got to get serious because this is getting out of control. It's just fighting over who gets to control whatever it is. And I know there's a lot of lobbyist money going on. I mean, my state rep said in a meeting that the day that the vote was coming around to elect the Speaker of the House and the floor majority leader, there are lobbyists crawling everywhere. And if you're getting that amount of lobbyists in the building just to help elect a certain person for speaker or majority floor leader, it doesn't leave much hope that these same lobbyists are wanting what's best for Missourians. So it's just a lot of frustrating things that are going on.
If I could really quickly just for the correction, it was $700 million. That's what Parson was awarded by DESE for.
I'm sorry. I was
expanding DESE off by $700 million since 2018.
Okay, my bad.
But to John's point there, I just wanted to ask. Well, I guess it's two questions really. One, what kind of impact on like the day-to-day, week-to-week? Like, are there lobbyists up there just all the time for like the big causes? Are they constantly just like knocking on doors, trying to win people over, or not really making promises, but like kind of hinting that, man, your campaign would love some money and we would love a vote for this? Like, what kind of lobbyists tactics are we seeing going on in Jeff City, and how much is it affecting the legislation that's coming out?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. So, yeah, I mean, they're in the building every day, and it's their First Amendment right to do so. It's the precedent is there. I think that was a Supreme Court ruling at some point. I'd have to go back and look, but they have their interest groups that help fund whatever lobbyist group this is, and that's what their job is, to persuade us as representatives into voting or passing legislation their way. And, obviously the best way to do that is through money. Of course, they can't talk about that in the building, so that would be illegal. So it is implied, though, of course, that if you don't vote certain ways or if you don't help do certain things, then it is implied that obviously you're probably not going to get their support. So that's the kind of the nasty side of the argument, not the argument, of the building, of the political realm, because it's not like the grassroots is out here fundraising hundreds of millions of dollars. unfortunately, we're everyday people, so we just don't have that money. And when you have corporations that are helping fund these lobbyist groups that then turn around and turn that money and put it towards leadership, and you have this kind of like never-ending circle or this cycle of special interest groups donating to leadership prioritizing those bills or their bills to make sure that they get through the process. You could tell a lot of the special interest group bills got that we really wanted to pass got put on or came to the floor earlier on in session, because that's the best way to get bills across the line. But then, the bills go somewhere, whether that's to hearings, whether that's to whatever. We get through session, then all of a sudden, all the money kind of comes in. Veto session is notorious for a bunch of fundraisers going on, so you can go look at PACs that support candidates and go look at how much funding came into the coffers on both sides. By the way, it's not just Republicans; it's Republicans and Democrats. Both have a bunch of fundraisers on the week of veto session, and there's some reps that'll rake in, 50, 60K in a single day or a single fundraiser from, lobbyist groups. So that's just kind of the name of the game. I don't know how you beat it, but the shell games that we play now because of what Clean Missouri passed back in 2018 or whatever is certainly far worse than I think what it used to be. So but to what you're getting at, your point, yeah, I mean, 100% lobbyists, their money talks. Money talks. I won't even say lobbyist money talks. Money talks, because the number one goal in that building, I actually said this on the floor about redistricting, is power. And what's the best way to keep that power? Well, making sure you have as many seats, your party has as many seats as you could possibly get. And what's the best way to keep those seats? Money. Statistically speaking, if you spend more money than your opponent, you will win. Not every time, but it gives you a better percentage. So what's everyone's goal there? To come back, to try to do more, good things, whatever those good things are. Each candidate is, or that's subjective. Every candidate and every representative is different. So that's kind of the unfortunate reality of Jefferson City is, if you take a look at like what human action is, right? Everybody does things for a reason. We're incentivized to do certain things, and in Jeff City, we're incentivized to cozy up next to lobbyists, because that's the best way to get reelected, and that's the best way to get your bills across the line. Because guess what? There's a very real possibility that if you donate to HRCC or you donate to maybe other candidates' PACs or campaign committees, through you can't do it as an actual candidate, but you can have a PAC that supports you, but that can donate to other campaigns. And if you are doing that and you're running for leadership, well, you're essentially getting their support as well. So there's a lot of ways that the lobbyist money can be divvied out, and rather than just going to one person or rather than just going to HRCC. But the reality is they donate a lot of money, and they do that to get legislation across the line. That's to put it bluntly, and that's how the building works.
Right.
So if you want to get legislation across the line, pay up.
Right. They wouldn't be spending the money if it wasn't effective. So, and
exactly,
keep spending it. Specifically with education, though, are there a lot of education lobbyists up there? Do you have to deal with the NEA or the NED? Do they have a presence?
They're on both sides.
Right. That's what we're saying, is that no matter who's in power, whether it was the Democrats or the Republicans, DESE has grown every year significantly. Yep. And so it's just assuming it, like, not hard to put pieces together that their lobbyists seem to be effectively working both sides, you'd say?
Yeah, so it can be argued that the school choice lobby is one of the most what's the word I'm looking for here? Not diligent, but maybe aggressive, but not in a like negative way. Just I mean aggressive as in like there's a lot of money coming in right now through lobbyist PACs or school choice lobbyist groups and things along those lines. And, what school choice looks like, man, that's every group is different, right? So like, I know what my school choice looks like. I homeschool my kids. I want my taxes to stay with my kids to help me fund homeschool my kids so I can create independent thinkers, or not create, but help mold them into independent thinkers. And that's what my ideal schooling situation would look like, is the parents get to make those choices and use their money to do so. But that's not every lobbyist groups. There's school choice lobbyist groups, of course. There's ESA people who are very heavily invested in ESAs, so they want to see them expanded, which happened this year. There's there's not so strongly, but there are like voucher groups out there, and so it's on both sides. You have the NEA coming in, and typically I've never really had them come to my office, but they have certainly came to hearings and spoke against bills, talking about the NEA. And so it's on both sides.
Gotcha. So I guess my follow-up kind of is, what does John Patterson do when he's not literally being the Speaker of the House? Like, Sessions not in at the moment. Where can you find him? What's his circle like?
Well, I'm not in it, so I mean,
right. But who are the people on the floor that he's like associating with? Is he having meetings with people in suits all day long? Like
that is the case. Yeah. So like to John's credit, he didn't get to that position by sitting in the side gallery or sitting in his office. The dude works, and I've said this. Obviously we don't agree a lot politically, but I certainly think he's probably the smartest guy in the House, and he's definitely one of the hardest workers. So you give credit where it's due, and you have a sense of respect for someone who, yes, you may not agree with the tactics, you may not agree with politically, and you may not agree with just generally how they do things, but they've been successful. He's been successful. So yeah, a lot of meetings. Obviously, he's the head honcho, so that's where the special interests want to meet. But he's also got representatives to deal with from both sides of the aisle. He's I don't really talk to his office much, but I'm sure there is plenty of representatives that are reaching out to him and going to his office and meeting him, trying to get legislation across the line and trying to make deals that way. But I don't really see it because I'm not one of those, because I'm typically out just researching bills. So I don't know. It was kind of funny though. My daughter, who's 10 years old, I bring my family with me a lot to the Capitol. As I said, we homeschool, and she knows who Mr. Patterson is. And it was earlier on in session, and she was like, how come the speaker isn't actually ever at the dais? So she thought that was interesting. So I kind of had to let her fill her in on that. Speaker not really doing the actual original speaker's responsibilities, which was just maintaining decorum. Obviously, the role has grown far larger than that. And, I side on this. I'm with the side that says we need to kind of hone that in, of course. Maybe we should just have a speaker that just keeps decorum, and everyday representatives have a little bit more power and a little bit more say. Do
you think, Bryant, that I'm kind of asking a dumb question here, but it's the dialogue, right? Do you think we'll ever get a strong body that's kind of more, I don't know, freedom oriented, where they'll maybe finally agree that the rules of the House need to change? When I brought this up to my state rep, he's like, well, there's 1,000 bills that are proposed and, this last session, and you can't hear them all. And I'm like, well, yeah, no kidding. Or you'd be in session all year round for 10, 12 hours a day. I get that. But there's some really good bills out there, and there's some really horrible bills. But why not pick the most popular ones, or whatever that people seem to really be behind, and let them hit the floor, and let them and have the debate, have the dialogue, have the discussion, and see what goes from there instead of, again, the special interest choosing a bill. I mean, we played a video, I don't remember how long ago, it was sometime during the session, of somebody from like the Cattlemen's Association in testimony over a bill about not letting biological males play in female sports. And he was so upset that that testimony went on that long. Like, he was like, come on, guys, I have tax credits we need to get out. Why are you talking about this? You're going to get the win, even though I don't know. No one's getting hurt by this. Like, okay, clearly you're not paying attention, but stuff like that. But do you ever think that is there a chance that we could get back to where the rules were more like they used to be, and maybe the legislators had a little more say? Maybe the people would have a little more say on what bills are going to be up for debate, because the gold and silver bill 2 sessions ago, like, they were at, I think, Patterson's office. The phone was ringing so much, and it was all about gold and silver, that they ended up ignoring the phone. It was just red light was going off constantly, and they just quit answering it. And then get to the end of the day, and they just like, ignore that. So do you think we'll ever get back to rules that are tilted maybe back towards the legislators having a little more power in the House?
I would say the answer to that is no. Just being honest. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I'll continue to fight for it, because I honestly think it's probably the second most important thing that we could do. The most important thing would be literally sticking to single subject bills. I've said that pretty much all year long. I've been saying that all summer long as I've been giving some of the speeches, that I think the most conservative thing we could do as a state is actually abide by Article 3, Section 23, passing single subject bills. Far less would get done, which is a good thing. So what's Calvin Coolidge said, I think it was Calvin Coolidge, that it's far more important to stop bad legislation than it is to pass good legislation. Well, the reason bills are log rolled is because, in my opinion, it's to pass bad legislation. It's get that bad legislation across the line. And if they were all single subject, we wouldn't pass nearly half the bills. Just because there's 1,700 bills that are filed doesn't mean we have to hear them. Right. I mean, if there's 1,650 bills, then they're all bad. Like, let's not pass any bills. The only obligation that we have is to pass a budget. And so I don't know, like, to me, that's not a good argument. And I understand the thought process, but to me, like, I want to at least have these conversations, and that, once again, the communication is just so poor. We don't have these conversations. So, like, I would love to talk to the floor leader for next year, who is now our speaker designee with Alex Riley, and I will be setting up some point to talk about what these changes looked like. There's always an argument against. So, like, last year, before, I didn't actually propose this rule, but I did discuss it with some people that have been there longer than me about how maybe the chairs of the committees can be in charge of hearing bills. Maybe they'd give them a little bit more power. Maybe the vice chair has some say. The committee themselves should be able to have an opportunity to remove those chairs if the chairs are not doing what the committee wants. Like, those small nuances that really aren't really big changes, and I really don't think they would affect things on a everyday basis, but I think would give more power to us as representatives, rather than us all going to the king up at top. We get to go at least talk to maybe the supervisors. Maybe it's not ideal to where we're not the Senate, so we're not all going to be equal power, or at least close to it, but at least give us a little bit more. We need some crumbs. We need to be able to have an opportunity to speak for our constituents back at home, and not have to worry about the consequences. Because right now, all you got to worry about is making mad basically one person. And if that one person is mad at you, well, then your legislation's done. And that's of course, it's done intentionally that way. And who's going to give that power up? Who's to say? Like, you're going to need a George Washington to get in there and potentially change that. So I just don't see it happening. And I was hopeful kind of coming in that maybe our class would be a little bit different because everyone, by the way, knows it. All of us representatives know it. We see it. We know it's not good government, but it's the way it is. It's the way it's been for a long time. The other party does it in other states, so we have to do it here. And our party's in control, so it's not so bad.
Yeah, that's really hard to hear. You know, we've heard it from state.
Well, can I say one thing, John?
Sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't mean to interject, but there's a statement that I'm not going to name who it was, but it's by a senior this year, and he said it was early on session. I was out to dinner with him, and he told me, he said, Bryant, he said, I'm going to give you a wake up call. He said, there's really only about 38,000 people, constituents that really matter in the House, and that's the Speaker. So he was exactly right.
But so he says that, right? He says 38,000 constituents matter, but I know where he's coming from. I know what he's saying, but I would bet you that those 38,000 constituents may not be real happy about what's going on in, from their guy in the House. And,
that's fair.
It's a thing too that, a lot of people ask, how did we get here? How did we get to the place we are now? And it's like, well, if we had legislators for years, if we stayed on top of our legislators, of our lawmakers, and said, don't you dare going around passing bills with 1,500 subjects in them and the title's wrong. If you didn't keep doing that, we wouldn't be here right now. If we didn't depend on lobbyist money so much so the Republicans could maintain their majority in the House and the Senate, maybe we wouldn't be here right now. There's so many things that go on that they try to justify. Well, if we don't do these things, we can't maintain a majority. Well, I'm sorry, but the majority doesn't seem to be doing too many pro-liberty things right now, right? I mean, it doesn't look like we're trying to limit government. It doesn't look like we're trying to cut spending, reduce taxes, any of this stuff. It's same business day in, day out. So the majority has done nothing for, I would say, hasn't done a lot for liberty in Missouri. But I will ask you, because I'm pretty sure you were in the live chat right after the gold and silver bill passed the House and was headed to the governor's desk. That, Mike Moon amended it in because he knew the bill, the bill he amended it to was very important, and it gave it the best chance to pass on through the chambers onto the governor's desk. But he himself also voted against it because he knew it was unconstitutional. And am I happy that we have gold and silver here in Missouri now? Yes. Am I happy the way it got done? No. But I don't think we ever really got to talk to you about your thoughts on that bill and got your take on it.
Yeah, that was exactly, the funny thing is I can actually claim that I didn't vote against it because I was out for my wife's we had our newest baby. We had our newborn when that bill came to the floor. But I did. It was funny because Gary Ridnour texted me and I said, hey, and maybe even you did, or maybe I texted you, I can't remember, and said that, yeah, the bill's multi-subjected. But I did have the opportunity to be able to vote it out of committee when we voted on it in government efficiency, the original gold and silver bill. And then I also got to vote on it on the floor when it actually came through the House as a single subject bill. And that's why Bill Hardwick, even though that's why Bill Hardwick is great in many instances, because most of the bills that he brings to the floor are actually single subject. So it was very disheartening as I looked at the process and it goes to the Senate. And then, you see that it's not going to ever make it through because it's not a priority bill. There's really not special interest backing it. But it is sound money. Like it's actually good for Missourians. That is going to give Missourians an alternative form of money rather than relying on fiat currency. And it's really the only thing as a state that we could do to try to battle the inflation from terrible monetary policy of the federal government. And it's crazy. You would think that would absolutely be something that conservatives would be behind, but it's just not a priority. So anyways, I was thankful that we got it across the line. I was very disheartened that I was going to have to vote against it. But in the end, I guess I didn't have to because my baby came and saved me from that vote. But, I told her, like, there's criticism, across the state, right? Like that's just, Bryant votes no on everything. But I can promise you there's a reason behind the no votes. It's not like I'm just like, this doesn't look like a good bill. No. Like I legitimately research pretty much every piece of legislation that comes to my desk. Now, not all 1,700, but if it's coming to the floor or it's coming to my committee, I research the bill. And if my family's not with me, I'm in the building at 7 o'clock in the morning and I don't leave until literally 10 o'clock at night. Usually I have like sandwich stuff in my office and I just eat dinner by myself while I'm researching legislation. There's one night a week I would go out with like Justin Sparks and Lisa Durnell and Maisie Christensen and Keith Elliott and like that kind of like ultra conservative group. But other than that, I'm researching legislation. And so there's always reasoning why I would vote no. And specifically on that bill, it was going to be because it was multi-subjected. But, to Mike's credit, that was a very smart move in doing what he did. And that's the kind of stuff that we have to try to do because you can still be effective. And in the general sense of what everybody thinks effectiveness is getting legislation across the line, right? I had a district priority bill that came to that we got across the line thanks to working with other representatives. And to give a shout out to Representative Hovis from Jackson, Missouri, not Jackson County, but Jackson, Missouri, to help me get that across the line. And that's the kind of stuff that, you still have to work on these relationships and still make friendships and still be kind to people and treat them the way that you want to be treated. So that way they can still scratch your back and help you out. And Mike Moon has done that too. I don't know anybody that really ever has a bad thing to say about him in the general sense. Sometimes there's a vote that he takes and then all of a sudden they throw him under the bus for a little bit. But everyone knows that where his heart is at is doing the right thing, following the Constitution, following Christ and his faith. And that's the way that he legislates, and he's consistent on that. And that's what I try to do as well. I try to be principled. I try to make sure that there's a reasoning behind every vote, whether that's a yes, whether that's a no. I always have a reasoning behind it. And that's I personally think I was the most consistent person in the House this year.
Well,
but I did want to bring up. Oh, sorry. I just wanted to bring up one point because you were talking about like kind of like checks on the government earlier, and I know you guys know this, but to remind everybody and remind Missourians that it is the Missourians' duty to be the check on the government. Once again, as we alluded to earlier, the government is not going to hone in on itself. Your representatives aren't going to hone in on the government. That is proven. We have a long-standing precedent of that not changing. So what did the founders do? The founders realized it's in the Declaration of Independence. Like they realize that it's up to the people. And our forefathers of our state put that in our very first Article 1, Section 1 in our state constitution, where it says that all political power is vested in and derived from the people, and that all government originates from the people and is founded upon their will only, and is instituted solely for the good of the whole. So think about that. Like that, the government derives its power from you. And if you're not willing to step up and be that check and stop the government from, being tyrannical or usurping more power from you, then who is? Nobody's going to. So that's got to be a main selling point to Missourians right now. If you're not happy with the government, look, I'm sorry. Historically speaking, your representative, your senator's probably not going to help a whole lot. you're going to have to be the persons to step up and do it. So I just wanted to bring that point up to something you said earlier.
No, that's good. So I think the last couple weeks we covered something from Mr. Dorr from the Missouri Firearms Coalition, basically bashing Senator Moon because he voted against the certain SEPA bill. Now, the SEPA bill that Tom and Brandon and Catherine and I covered, one of those versions was terrible because in the language it said the people of the state had pretty much given the power to the General Assembly to regulate the manufacture and sale of firearms, ammunition. I'm like, I don't ever remember reading that in a history book. So that's way off course. And as Senator Moon explained, there was a huge loophole in that bill. It was not a good bill. And there was another version of it that was way better, that some of that language was eliminated, but I think they put it back in. I don't remember. But your thoughts on an entity that supposedly wants to get us, help us maintain our natural rights of self-defense, would be behind a bill that had language like that in it and act like that's the greatest thing since sliced bread. I mean, it made no sense to me. It really, honestly, it ticked me off because I was like, what is this guy's problem? And that's just to add to that too, not that you have to comment on it, but that's something I noticed that's kind of problematic in that we get these bills and they really hype them up and there'll be some grassroots behind it. And it's like, did you guys actually look at the language? Because there might be a reason some of these principled people refuse to vote yes on it, because, it's going to go straight to the Missouri Supreme Court. And then those guys who wouldn't know the Constitution if it hit them in the head are going to vote a certain way. And they're going to throw the bill right back out and say, oh, it's not constitutional, can't do it. And it's like we're wasting taxpayer money to push these god-awful bills. And then you get trounced for not backing them. I mean, what are your thoughts when things like that occur? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the frustrating side of Jeff City. I know what you're referencing with the post about Senator Moon, and that's unfortunate. I don't know if they have a past or a history, or maybe it was because him not supporting SEPA. I too, similar like what you said. Yeah. So Section 9 of a specific section where it says the people of Missouri have vested the General Assembly with the authority to regulate the manufacture, possession, exchange, and use of firearms within the borders of the state, subject only to the limits imposed of the Amendment 2 of the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of Missouri. Well, I did not like that language. I actually brought that up on the to Representative Hardwick as well, and he's also not a fan of that. I had an amendment, actually. I think it's on the website. Yeah, it was on there. I did not present it. I was requested not to, and it's one of those things that it was never, my amendment wasn't going to pass anyways. So I certainly do support SEPA as a whole and the principle behind it. So even though this wasn't the perfect bill, unfortunately, it wasn't going to get any better than what we got. So I could argue that the gold and silver bill as well that got brought to the floor also was not a perfect bill. Like, there's a lot of regulatory matters behind the gold and silver bill in regards to putting all of the rules and regulations in the treasurer's office and a lot of red tape there. So anyways, it seems like everything that we try to pass under this building ends up getting watered down, or you end up with small weird things like that I don't even know where it comes from. Because I think that section that I read just a little bit ago is really contradictory to what SEPA, the principle of what SEPA means in general is we are preserving the Second Amendment. We are essentially, it's not technically nullification, but that's the term I use, is we're basically saying that the federal government has no authority here over Missourians' Second Amendment rights. And when we say that the people of Missouri have vested the General Assembly to regulate, that just seems to kind of contradict that message that it says like, well, the federal government can't do nothing here, but we can. And, it's what is a right if a government can come in and usurp power onto that right. So, that was weird. So I think the unfortunate nature of the building is a lot of people like to get aggressive. A lot of people get emotional when things don't really need to be that way. And I try not to do that. So I don't know what the history is between that, I guess, political drama, if you will, but it's unfortunate, but they're hardly the only ones to do it. There's plenty of other organizations out there doing the same thing. So that's the stuff that I just stay out of. And it's the golden rule: treat people the way you'd want to be treated. That's what I live by. That's what I teach my kids. Right is right, and wrong is wrong.
Yeah, it was just unfortunate because they're like, I think the most disheartening part of the statement was, it was like they've almost regretted ever backing him on anything. And I thought, this is one bill that he disagreed with you guys on, and he was right, as far as I'm concerned, in his findings of the bill. And to say that you just ever regret backing the guy because of one time, like how do we expect, or how do these organizations expect to build, a real big grassroots movement where people are pushing for liberty things, and then the guy one time has a disagreement with your bill, and he's pretty much dead on generally, and you suddenly just want to throw the towel, just want to throw him under the bus and go, I can't believe we ever backed this guy. And I thought, well, dang, dude, I mean, let's not forget that we had a really good SEPA bill, and because of idiots in courts across the country, again, wouldn't know the Constitution if it hit him in the head, have ruined it. It's not Mike Moon's fault. We had a pretty good SEPA bill. We had law enforcement up in arms because of the penalties for them, enforcing unconstitutional gun laws. And we could go off on all other tangents. I hate seeing when they put something in the bill and they say something about the supremacy clause. I'm like, that's not what you think it means. Yep. The very first version that passed, I had one of the authors of that bill on my show for like 15 minutes, and somebody watching the live chat said, does that mean we get to have full autos? And he's like, well, no, because the supremacy clause won't allow that. And then another viewer is like, I don't think this guy knows what the supremacy clause
exactly
means. It was a good bill. It was a pretty good bill. It was a pretty good sound bill. But again, because we have, as I guess Tom Martz might label them, idiots in black robes, they, the first time it went to court, the person from the Biden administration, whatever attorney, brought up, he went on his full 10 minutes and didn't even make the case. He literally made the case for the other side, what he was arguing. And the judge is like, well, this is thrown out because you've literally made their case for them. And then the audacity, the ignorance to say that you can't do that. That's unconstitutional. Like, wait a minute. So we're saying we get to have the full natural right of self-defense. We get that. According to the Second Amendment in the Constitution. And you're telling us that it's unconstitutional to get back your natural right enumerated in the very document. It's like, it's those mental gymnastics that turn normal people into alcoholics, because you're trying to follow the breadcrumbs and you end up falling off a bridge or falling in a pothole and twisting your ankle because the road's just going in just the absolute wildest directions. And again, I normally consider myself the dumbest person in the room until those people start talking. And then I feel like I should be designing a new way to create nuclear fission or something, because they make me feel extremely intelligent.
Well, yeah, and the last time I checked, the 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution says the powers not delegated by the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively and to the people. So, obviously we have our Second Amendment that enshrines our God-given right to protect ourselves from tyranny, from a tyrannical government. And then we have the 10th Amendment that says the states can basically have full, or not, they don't have full control, but they essentially have their rights to be able to govern in the way that they see fit if it is not under the U.S. Constitution. And last time I checked, federal gun laws certainly infringe on the rights of not only Missourians but Americans in general. So yeah, it's very frustrating to me. It's kind of it's unbelievable to me that we even have to pass something like SEPA, because the way that I look at it is those protections shouldn't even be necessary, because our government should be following our U.S. Constitution, and our state should just naturally already not be helping the federal government in infringing on Missourians' rights already. So why are we passing legislation that is already kind of given to me? It's kind of the AG's office, right? Isn't that supposed to be what they're there for? To protect our rights from federal encroachment? And that obviously wasn't happening. So at least this bill had teeth, and it will certainly do some things if we can ever get it across the line again. But it's a crazy situation, but I look forward to working on it a little bit next year, and hopefully we can get that section out of there that says that the people of Missouri have okayed the General Assembly to regulate. So we're gonna have to work on that for sure.
All right, so Brandon, if you want to end, we got about 8 minutes left to go. Have at it.
Okay, one more question about the session.
Yep.
So your Democrat colleagues, obviously they're heavily outnumbered. What are their, like, I know you mentioned some of them will like kind of make deals, like I'll vote for your bill, you vote for my bill. I'm sure there's some of that across the aisle with Democrats, but in general, what is their strategy for moving their agenda forward? Are they really just there to kind of like voice the Democrat opinion in the House? Or do they have like, do they get their legislation across hardly ever? Or what do the Democrats mostly do with their time in the House?
Well, you could tell they're well more prepared on the floor than we are, because we already know the bills are going to pass. And when I say we, I'm generally talking about the Republican caucus, right? So we know our bills are going to pass. We know we don't need numbers to do those things. So we don't need to be well researched, because we don't need to speak on the bills, because it doesn't matter. Look, the House floor, it's theater. Like, just being honest, that's what it is. The bills are going to pass. It got brought to the floor. I think there was one bill, maybe two, that got voted down this year. I think it's just one. I'd have to go back and look. I know there's for sure one. I don't remember if there was any more than that. But other than that, everything else is just fundraising opportunities, in my opinion. This is just my subjective opinion. And so the Democrats can get up and they can preach on their democratic principles, raise money, make it look like they're fighting against the Republicans back home, but all in the back door, back there talking to the floor leader, making sure that, they're not being too loud towards the Republicans, because at any given time we can squander their voice. Because once again, that's because we have that much power. The floor leader has that much power. The speaker has that much power. So, and like I said, it's all across the country in every state. It's like that. So what I mean by that is if the Democrats get too out of hand, well, they'll just move the previous question and then shut them up in the House. And that's just a realistic thing. So everything we do is prefabricated, not like the specifics, not what people are going to say, but like ahead of time, the floor leader, the two floor leaders, you have the minority floor leader and you have our floor leader. They're working together, not in the sense of passing legislation, but hey, I'm going to give you about an hour's worth of floor time. Hey, this is a big bill. You got 3 hours. Don't do anything stupid. If you do anything stupid, if one of your members does anything dumb, I'm PQing right away. And of course, we as Republicans know that if something gets PQ'd or moved to the previous question, you don't vote against it. So, of course, I have in some times, because there have been times that either I was standing up to speak, or maybe like I remember one time Michael Davis was going to speak, or Maisie Christensen was going to speak, and they PQ'd past us, and we want to share our voice too. Like, why you give the Democrats 2.5 hours to speak, and then we finally stand up to speak, and then you PQ. Like, it is what it is. But anyways, it's. I think their whole goal is just to get more seats right now, just from my perspective. But there's people that got legislation across. I think Representative Prouty got something across, if I remember correctly. Maybe it was an amendment to a bill. Representative Marty Joe Murray, actual freshman, he got an amendment added into something that ended up passing. I remember him getting something across the line. Of course, there's a bunch of like bridge naming or road naming bills that they've got in and stuff too. So they're just making deals to try to get their small stuff across the line. But I think overall, everything that is done on the floor is prefabricated before we ever step foot out there.
Right. So they're out there just giving their stump speeches, looking for donors and trying to push the needle. But as far as like their major agenda or legislation, they're kind of just biding their time, waiting till they have more support. That's what it sounds like. Okay.
Yeah, pretty much. And to their credit, like, what else can you do? I don't know. I mean, we have so little power as individual Republicans. You have to have the numbers, otherwise there's nothing you can do. And the things that I find funny is like when you have the floor leader who you could talk about, like, on, I think it was the IP reform, or maybe it was redistricting. I can't remember. It was one of the two in the second special session we had here. Literally back there cutting it up with our floor leader, laughing, but just making sure that she got the last say in on the bill. And then she gets up, she just gets done spending 5 minutes over by the floor leader, cutting it up, laughing, and then all of a sudden you get up to the microphone, serious, yelling at the Republicans, slam papers down, walk off the floor. Yeah. And then the camera goes off. Exactly. And granted, she's not the only one. So it's a game. That's a part of the game.
Gotcha.
It's Republicans do.
Yeah, of course they do.
A lot of political theater.
Exactly.
Yeah. It could be better. The last day of the Texas House, they had a mariachi band.
Hold that thought. Man, what is going on? I just lost audio. Hold up 1 second. I think my Bluetooth headphones here are what's causing the issue. So if I could just stall for another 15 seconds, it will come back on. It's coming back. Sorry, Brandon. Go ahead, buddy.
No, you're good. I was just basically saying, yeah, it's all pretty much, it's all theater up there. It was better than the Texas House, though, who finished their session with a mariachi band instead of passing important legislation that they were waiting on the last day till. So it could be worse. And then I guess my final question for you is, hypothetically speaking, all the kids are in bed. Do you have a like a guilty pleasure TV show that you enjoy, or like a hobby that you do outside of politics? I know you got 4 kids, you run the business, you're on the house floor, but do you have like hobbies or TV shows? Because I'll be honest with you, every now and then my fiance, she'll watch like a reality TV show from the 90s, like Rock of Love or Tila Tequila's Shot of Love. And every now and then I just get wrapped up in it. So do you have any guilty pleasure show?
Got 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'll make that quick. Honestly, no. Sports. I'm a sports nut. I grew up playing a lot of sports. If I can ever get an opportunity to play basketball or get outside with my son, play catch, he's in fall ball right now. I greatly enjoy that. Other than that, it's pretty much right now in the season of life that we're in. It is literally, we wake up, work. I do work out about 3 or 4 days a week. So I'll get up at 4 o'clock, go work out, come back home, cook the kids breakfast. And then, we own our businesses. So then we get right to work. If something political comes up, we run to that. Gymnastics, baseball in the evenings, turn around, do it again. So it's nonstop. It's kind of funny because I got on Netflix, I think 2 days ago, and I was just going through the screen, and I said, it sucks. I can't, nothing here intrigues me. So no, I guess, sorry. I'm a robot, apparently.
All right,
no emotion.
That's all right. All right, folks. That's going to do it for this week's edition of the Missouri Liberty Report. Bryant Wolfin, great to have you back on. And just to all of those of you in YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, any podcasting app, at molibertyradio.us, we greatly appreciate your continued viewership and listenership. And again, don't forget to like, don't forget to follow. And we'll see you all next week right here at 6:30 p.m. on the Missouri Liberty Report.